I want to start out by talking about the ridiculous clip that has been resurfaced that shows Joe Biden saying that he actually likes Dick Cheney. And I know you're probably familiar with Dick Cheney, but let's go over some of the things that Dick Cheney is known for. He's a complete war hawk. He's a disaster. And actually, Jordan, let me pull it up. So Jordan put out a tweet saying, Dick Cheney is an immoral psychopath war criminal. The fact that Joe Biden doesn't recognize this is the clearest sign that he himself is a warmonger who sees hundreds of thousands of Iraqi deaths, and all the lives the U.S. has lost is just the price of business. So the fact that Joe Biden is essentially praising Dick Cheney is absolutely disgusting. Here's who Dick Cheney is, in case you've forgotten, in case you were too young during that period, or just as a refresher so that you're just as angry as we are at status quo that Joe Biden, the current frontrunner, by the way, of the Democratic primary, according to polls, we'll actually see if that's the case, who Dick Cheney really is. So Dick Cheney is a complete war hawk, has advocated for going to war for his entire career essentially, and has lied about the reasons for U.S. invasion. He started out working for the national government during Nixon's administration, and he was the Secretary of Defense under H.W. Bush. He oversaw the first Gulf War and American operations against Saddam Hussein. He said things like this in 2002, for example: "We now know that Saddam Hussein has resumed his efforts to acquire nuclear weapons. Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us." And again, that was August 2002 by Dick Cheney. You know, the one who Joe Biden likes and thinks is his friend. And the Iraq War was, of course, costly and deadly and is now extremely unpopular. And in fact, those who voted for it, like Joe Biden, are equally as unpopular in their votes. Those who voted for it and advocated for it are now very much looked down upon, except Joe Biden is so out of the moment that he doesn't even understand this. He can't even use his political mojo to realize that he shouldn't be saying crap like this. Now, given the clip that we're going to talk about where he says that he actually likes Dick Cheney was in 2015, but he knew he was going to be running for president, so you think he'd be politically smarter. But no, he's Hillary Clinton 2.0 and will continue to make gaffe after gaffe. So Dick Cheney and friends used 9/11 to start the War on Terror, which they expanded into Iraq, which we invaded in 2003, and it lasted until 2011. And Cheney, through his entire career, as I said, has been obsessed with Iraq. Saddam Hussein remained in power throughout the 1990s, even though we imposed sanctions and made a regime change to replace Hussein with someone who was more friendly to the United States. And Cheney has wanted regime change since at least 1997, and he, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, etc., founded the Project for a New American Century, which was a think tank that called for Hussein's removal. And if you haven't studied the Project for a New American Century, I highly recommend you do, because it is an insane think tank. The stuff that they did is crazy. And Abby Martin's brother, Robbie Martin, actually has a 3 or 4-part documentary out that talks about all this stuff and all the war hawkery that was going on and all the shenanigans behind the New American Century. So I do recommend that documentary for sure. And because Cheney wanted to go to war with Iraq so badly, he had to figure out a reason. And one of those reasons was to try to tie al-Qaeda together with Iraq. And he was trying to sell war to the American people. And he said things like, "We know that he has a long-standing government with various terrorist groups, including the al-Qaeda organization," meaning Saddam Hussein. And he also said his regime aids and protects terrorists, including members of al-Qaeda. So it's important to note that those are two different groups and there's no link between the two, even though he tried to link them. Both the 9/11 Commission and the CIA said that there was no proof that al-Qaeda and the Iraqi government were linked. But the Bush administration, including Dick Cheney, argued that we needed to invade Iraq and overthrow Hussein because he had weapons of mass destruction, which of course turned out not to be the case. Cheney manipulated the CIA, gained access to unverified documents, including one that alleged that Iraq had tried to purchase 500 tons of uranium from Niger. The International Atomic Energy Agency also had those documents and said that they were forgeries, but Cheney didn't care because it didn't fit the narrative. So we have Cheney, who lied about connections between al-Qaeda and Iraq, manipulated the CIA, misrepresented intelligence, lied to the American people, and used his position as the Vice President of the United States to go to an illegitimate war that cost thousands of Iraqi lives, thousands of American lives, and it's absolutely despicable that anyone could say that they are friends with this person or that they like this person is completely crazy. And Joe Biden is this completely crazy, apparently, because that's what he has done. So this clip of him, which I will play, saying that he likes Dick Cheney, has resurfaced, and a lot of people are talking about it. So let's go through some of the responses to this, other than my response, which is, oh my gosh, who could vote for Joe Biden? Why would anyone vote for him? He apparently likes regime change. He apparently likes war. He apparently loves Dick Cheney. Why would anyone on the Democratic side vote for this warmonger, Joe Biden? Let's go to the Business Insider. Joe Biden's past praise for Dick Cheney is suddenly getting attention 1 week into his 2020 campaign. And that's because of the video that surfaced that I keep talking about, that I will go ahead and show you. I don't know if it's on this page, but I think I'm going to show it sooner than I was originally. So here it is in a Chris Hayes tweet.
First of all, I actually like Dick Cheney for real. I get on with him. I think he's a decent man.
Now, there you have it. There's the clip that everyone is talking about. Everyone is just disgusted, except for Joe Biden's supporters, which again, how could you be one of those people? You're not supposed to be a Dick Cheney fan if you are on the Democratic side, so how could you be a Joe Biden fan? And yet he is first in the polling. So here's the insider's breakdown of this. Former Vice President Joe Biden praised former Vice President Dick Cheney in 2015, and he's facing criticism for it now in his 2020 campaign. What Biden said at the time: I actually like Dick Cheney for real. I get on with him. I think he's a decent man. Who could get on with a war hawk, a warmonger, someone who lied to the American people? Who could admit that, even if they thought that? Biden is clearly not a guy who's smart at politics. He is Hillary Clinton 2.0, and I'll say it again and again. He's actually, I think, worse than Hillary Clinton. Now, Biden is the front runner for the 2020 Democratic nomination, and his long record in public life is under increasing scrutiny as the race picks up steam. Former Vice President Joe Biden's past praise for his immediate predecessor is garnering a fair amount of negative attention just 1 week into his 2020 campaign. During an event at George Washington University in October 2015, Biden said he thought former Vice President Dick Cheney is a, quote, decent man. I actually like Dick Cheney for real, Biden said at the time. I get on with him. I think he's a decent man. The former vice president also said Cheney was extremely helpful in teaching him about the requirements of the office after the 2008 election as he transitioned into the role. He was extremely helpful and gracious about the office and the legal parameters of the office, Biden said of Cheney. This was not the only time Biden has praised Cheney. When Cheney's bust was unveiled at the U.S. Capitol in December 2015, Biden quipped, "As I look around this room and up on the platform, I want to say thank you for letting me crash your family reunion. I'm afraid I've blown his cover. I actually like Dick Cheney." Biden's affinity for Cheney is apparently quite mutual. In August 2015, for example, Cheney said he hoped Biden would run for president in 2016. "I'd love to see Joe get in the race," Cheney said at the time. Again, Democrats and Republicans are essentially the same thing. Biden didn't ultimately run that year, but as his 2020 campaign picks up steam 5 years later, the former vice president is getting slammed for praising his immediate predecessor. A clip of Biden's flattering remarks about Cheney resurfaced on Twitter on Thursday and went viral, causing Cheney to rise to the top 5 trends in the country by early evening. A number of media figures went after Biden for expressing warm feelings towards someone they regard as a war criminal and expressed dismay that he is the 2020 Democratic frontrunner at present. Cheney is widely regarded as the architect of the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the catalyst for a number of controversial policies the Bush administration implemented following the terror attacks of September 11, 2001, including, in quotes, enhanced interrogation techniques. And that's something we haven't talked about, are those enhanced interrogation techniques, such as waterboarding. That these people mutually praise each other once again shows you that Democrats and Republicans are not really that different, especially when you get into those Joe Biden characters, what Obama turned out to be, what Hillary Clinton is. They're not different than George Bush. They're not different than Dick Cheney. That's why it is so frustrating what the Democratic Party has turned into, what it's always been. Now, people like Bernie Sanders are trying to transform it, even though Bernie, has always run as an independent in his Senate races. He is running on the Democratic side, Democratic Party, for president. It's kind of what you have to do if you want to run for president in our two-party system, in our two-party country. Let's get into some more from what Newsweek has to say about this and some more of what the people's opinions have been about this. Here we have Newsweek. Former Vice President and current 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden was hit with criticism Thursday over a 2015 video showing him offering nuanced praise for Dick Cheney. Biden made the now controversial remark in October 2015 at the Walter Mondale, A Living Legacy event held at George Washington University and sponsored by the University of Minnesota's Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. We've already read the exact quote, and you've seen the video. Biden said during the event that Cheney was an extremely powerful vice president and had his own national security team. Biden added Cheney had a very different relationship with President Bush than Biden did during his 2 terms with President Barack Obama. The honoree of the 2015 event, Walter Mondale, who was vice president under President Jimmy Carter and later the 1984 Democratic Party presidential nominee, subsequently separated himself from Biden's opinion of Cheney. So that's telling right there. So here we have some of the opinions. This is a problem. A decent man doesn't mislead a country into a misguided war that kills thousands of American GIs and leads to the death of hundreds of thousands of civilians, wrote Mother Jones's David Corn Thursday. Sean King said, "Y'all come get your dude. He went on and on about how much he likes Pence too. Disgusting." AJ Plus producer Sana Saeed said, "Without exaggeration, Dick Cheney is one of the most evil men to set foot in this world, a man behind whom a trail of war crimes follow. And Biden thinks he's a decent man? Is this your man, Democrats?" Both Cheney and President George W. Bush have been the target of Trump family trash talk, with Donald Trump Jr. saying his father is ending his reckless and endless wars in March after he briefly criticized the Trump administration's foreign policy. Cheney is derided in many liberal circles as a pro-war hawk who helped lead the push into a prolonged and deadly war in the Middle East following the September 11, 2001 terror attacks. A 5-term member of Congress, former White House Chief of Staff, and Secretary of Defense Cheney had an historically low approval rating of 13% when he left office in January 2009. The fact that Dick Cheney had an approval rating of 13% when he left office should signal to people like Joe Biden that it's probably not a great idea to say that you are best buddies with him when you're trying to run for president. But of course, it's going to roll off his back like everything else has done. Joe Biden has also been accused of inappropriate touching and kissing and sniffing of hair, and that apparently hasn't hurt him in the polls. And in fact, he's been bolstered in the polls. And it doesn't make any sense. His comments from 2015 and that he no doubt still holds today also don't make any sense. Let's go through some more opinions because I find it fascinating to read what people have to say. And it's actually quite encouraging, under these distressing circumstances, that there are sane people in the world. So here we have a Free Beacon compilation of reactions. The headline, Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff says Biden's praise of Dick Cheney is a dangerously radical view. Shoykat Chakrabarty, the chief staff for freshman Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, slammed former Vice President and 2020 candidate Joe Biden on Thursday night for his past praise of former Vice President Dick Cheney. I want to say, one second here, let me put myself back up. I do want to give the disclaimer that I used to be a volunteer for Justice Democrats in Brand New Congress, so I worked under Shoykat, worked on Alexandria's campaign and all that. So I just want to get that disclaimer out of the way, just because I'm reading a quote from him, I guess. Back in 2015, Biden complimented Cheney, who served 2 terms as George W. Bush's vice president during an event at George Washington University. He called him a decent man and talked about how he was extremely helpful, blah, blah, blah. We've read that. Biden's praise of Cheney resurfaced this week, prompting Chakrabarty to criticize him on Twitter, saying Cheney represents the depravity of evil. So here's exactly what Shoykat said. Washington is full of decent men doing evil. Joe Biden's take here is a predominant sentiment in D.C. People here prioritize the appearance of decency over the depravity of evil. This is not how the rest of America thinks, and that's why this is a dangerously radical view. Chakrabarty wasn't the only Democrat to attack Biden over his praise of Cheney. Daily Kos founder Marcos Mulistas, excuse me if I pronounce that incorrectly, former Hillary Clinton advisor Zach Petkanis, and Black Lives Matter activist Sean King all tweeted their outrage over the old footage. So Marcos said, hey Democrats, you nostalgic about the Bush years? Perpetual war, civil liberties violations, shooting friends in the face? Yeah, then you're in luck. Biden is your guy. Sean King said, it's not Biden's gaffes that disturb me so much. It's his measured, well-thought-out takes on Dick Cheney, Mike Pence, Anita Hill, personal space in the Me Too movement, mass incarceration, the Iraq War, NAFTA, and credit card companies and bankruptcies. Very good points with Sean King. And Zach Petkanis said, yikes, 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 which basically sums it up. And Cynthia Nixon said, Joe Biden, you've just called America's most anti-LGBT elected leader a decent guy. So there are many, many reasons why Joe Biden should not be supportive or friends with or praising Dick Cheney. She also said, please consider how this falls on the ears of our community, at Dr. Biden. Joe Biden in February 28th, 2019, responded, you're right, Cynthia. I was making a point in a foreign policy context that under normal circumstances, a vice president wouldn't be given a silent reaction on the world stage. But there's nothing decent about being anti-LGBTQ rights, and that includes the vice president. So there you go. There's a political answer for you from back in February. We'll see how he responds to this latest gaffe that was from years ago. And No doubt he will be pressured to make a response, at least in my opinion, because this is such a big deal. It's really important that he does respond to this. Does he still hold these views? Is he going to have a disclaimer against Dick Cheney now? Even if he does, it doesn't matter because we know what his true views are. Joe Biden will continue to say terrible things. Terrible things will continue to surface about Joe Biden because he's a terrible candidate for president. I'm not going to say he's a terrible human being, although because he supports the warmongering of Dick Cheney and the Bush administration, that kind of does put him in the terrible human being category, wouldn't you say? I don't know. I'm not surprised about this. I am just thoroughly, thoroughly disgusted about this. Joe Biden should not be any kind of front runner in the Democratic primary. That's for darn sure.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.